Okay, so the session will be recorded, so it is made available for reference or for attendees who could not attend today. We will mute all attendees to avoid any background noise for the presenters. If you have any questions as you hear the panelists, please use the Q&A or chat feature to send your questions to us, and we will go through as many of them as we can during the Q&A session after our last panelist. So the agenda for today, we will do our land acknowledgement, and then we'll walk through our panelist introductions. We'll set the foundation just with a few slides around vaccines and some other key pieces of information. And then the panelists will each present a bit of their perspectives and experiences. And lastly, we'll have time really for that Q&A for all of you to engage the panelists with questions that may come up as we go, or you've brought with you already to today's session. As a wrap up, we will review takeaway points, and there is an evaluation that will be available to you automatically at the end. And there's a couple polls as well. So let's go ahead and start off with our land acknowledgement. We are grateful for the opportunity to gather, though virtually, on this land, and we thank the generations of Indigenous people who have taken care of this land long before other nation groups came. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territories of the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit, whose territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We also recognize the contributions the Métis, Inuit, I think that's Métis, let me correct myself, I believe that's Métis, Inuit, First Nations, and other Indigenous peoples have made in shaping and strengthening this province and this country as a whole. We also need to continuously educate ourselves about the colonial history of this country and understand how the wrongdoing of the past still impacts the present and the future. I encourage everyone at this session to actively seek information and take action. So let me move into our introductions. And so today we have with us, I'm so sorry guys. I don't have my most up-to-date copy, so let me pull up one little thing I need right here, and I will be able to read from here. Okay, so today we have with us a wonderful panel, a nice mix of dedicated professionals who really wanted to share their perspectives, and we tried to do a mix so that you're hearing from a variety of perspectives. So first of all, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Isaac Odami. He is the hematology section head in the Division of Hematology Oncology and the medical director of the Global Sickle Cell Disease Network at the Center for Global Child Health at the Hospital for Sick Children. He is a professor and director of the Division of Adult and Pediatric Hematology in the Departments of Medicine and Pediatrics at the University of Toronto. He holds the Alexandra Yeo Chair in Hematology at the University of Toronto. His work with the Center for Global Child Health is building enduring collaborations between clinicians, scientists worldwide to further research and advance the care of patients, particularly in low-income countries with the heaviest disease burden. So we welcome Dr. Odami. Next, we have Sandra Newton. She is an experienced clinician with training in developmental, clinical, and school psychology, as well as a longstanding interest in advocacy, education, and support for children, youth, and adults with sickle cell disease. She has a Master's of Arts and a PhD from the University of Toronto. At Chicago, Dr. Newton facilitates workshops and peer support group sessions, supports research initiatives, for example, the vaccination acceptance within the sickle cell disease / Black community research, and provides supportive counseling to clients. I also know Sandra's doing another session later this afternoon, a support group. So she's quite involved and very dedicated to the cause. So she can always provide some more info on that later on. Let's welcome Sinthu. Sinthu Shrikanthan is a social worker at Toronto General Hospital's Red Blood Cell Disorders Clinic. Her pronouns are she and her. There, Sinthu, at Toronto General Hospital, Sinthu brings together counseling with advocacy practice to support patients. She has a strong foundation in community-based social work, including areas such as youth work, gender-based violence, housing and homelessness, and settlement services. Sindhu completed a bachelor's degree of social work and a bachelor's degree of arts in Indigenous studies and sociology, both at McMaster University. She later went to York University to complete a master's degree of social work. You may be curious to know that outside of work, Sindhu enjoys volunteering, learning how to play the guitar, writing, and reading. Welcome, Sindhu, and welcome, Sandra. I didn't say that too. Delaney Hines is currently the lead for equity, inclusion, diversity, and anti-racism at Ontario Health. And he holds a Bachelor of Science in Integrated Science from Carleton University, a Master of Public Health from Western University's Interfaculty Program in Public Health at the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry, and a Master of Business Administration from Quantic School of Business and Technology. Delaney brings over 11 years of experience working in public health research to digital health, and most recently, equity, inclusion, and diversity. His interest in advancing equity in sickle cell disease care and health promotion activities, such as genetic screening, stems from his time supporting the ethical, social, and cultural program for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's Global Health and Global Development programs at St. Michael's Hospital, and the International Network for Evaluating Outcomes of Neonates at the Maternal Infant Care Research Center at Mount Sinai Hospital. Welcome, Delaney. So as you can see, we have a wonderful group of panelists here today, and I'm really excited to get started. So let's move into, wrong. So before we really get into the panel, there's just a few slides that I kind of wanted to run over because we have a poll. We want to ask you a question. And so I thought it was important before we ask you a question that you have a good understanding of the kind of like the foundation for where the question comes from. Okay, so, what is vaccine hesitancy? And so there was a group that came together, and it was quite a diverse group. I noticed there was like someone from Montreal, someone from the States, someone from, definitely from like Finland. So across Europe, and actually someone from China. So I kind of say it was a global group that came together to really look at vaccine hesitancy. And there's some key definitions I found that really help clarify some things from my perspective. So wanted to share that with you today. So vaccine hesitancy refers to a delay in acceptance or refusal of vaccines despite availability of vaccine services. It is a complex and context specific, and it varies across time, place, and vaccines. It is influenced by factors such as complacency, convenience, and confidence. And so that's really, I want to go into those three definitions briefly. And so what is vaccine confidence in relation to vaccine hesitancy? So it's trust in the effectiveness and safety of vaccines. You trust that the system that delivers them, including the reliability and competence of the health services and health professionals. And you have trust in the motivations of the policymakers who decide on the needed vaccines. Complacency, this exists where perceived risks of vaccine preventable diseases are low, and vaccination is not deemed a necessary preventative action. While vaccine convenience is measured by the extent to which physical availability, affordability, and willingness to pay, geographical accessibility, ability to understand, we're looking at language and health literacy, as well as appeal of immunization services affect the uptake of vaccine. So we're really focused on vaccine confidence. And so we have a question for you around vaccine confidence. And so let me get my next slide up and we will move into a poll. So we do have a couple polls for today. And so let me just find my poll. Okay, so let me see. So it looks, I'm just going to go into my, so bear with me. So guys, I'm going to be honest, it's the first time I'm running a webinar, so be gentle on a girl, let her find her way. Here we are. I feel good. It's going to come up in 1 second here. So I feel like if I go ahead and you should, I feel like you should see the, oh, no, you don't. Okay, I'm close, guys. I'm almost there. Maybe I can get one of my colleagues to unmute themselves. I'm not offended by saying I need help. I want to say that I can see my poll, but I can't show it to you because I can see you guys can't see it.
There should be a button within the window that pops up that allows you to say like launch. So when you click on the poll in the taskbar at the bottom, you'll see the poll pop up and you'll have a button to launch it.
Now, I understand that piece. On my taskbar, I don't see poll, but I am logged in as host. Like I don't actually see it. I usually do. I only see participants, chat. Oh, do any of you see the poll on your bar?
No, unfortunately I don't.
You don't, okay. So if I can't find it, I may move on, but I really want to use the poll. So just give me 1 sec. If I can stop sharing for 1 second, please. Maybe that will help me to see the poll. But I could see it this morning. And I'm definitely logged in. So I kind of feel like it's not me and it's technology. And so I'm going to move on to just put it out there. And then maybe by the end, we can really look at getting you to vote by then, because the poll won't come up for whatever reason. We are looking really at what is your level of vaccine confidence? And so we are trying to look at, would you say your vaccine confidence is like a 10 with respect to this, looking at these 3 bullet points? Do you feel that your confidence aligns quite nicely with this, that it's a 10? Or do you feel like, I'm not too close to that? Where do you fall in the range? And so 1 would have been the lowest. And we wanted to, of course, keep it confidential. So keep it in your mind. If you want to put it in the chat, if you feel comfortable, you want to put it in the chat and throw a number in the chat, that would be lovely. That way we can have a sense just in the audience. We just kind of want to see where we're sitting just before we get started. If not, we will continue moving through. But thank you for considering popping your answers into the chat. And for 1 more second, I'm going to try to see if I can find this poll, guys. We
no
even
problem.
posted and everything. Okay, so let me also close this to see if that helps. And no, all right. So let me reshare. Yep, let me reshare slides and we'll move on. This one, there we go, and sound perfect. Okay, so everyone should be able to see that. I do see something in the chat. Let me see. 5. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you participating in that. I certainly don't mind sharing mine. I feel pretty good about mine. Put mine up there to 9. But also, we don't want people to feel like they have to, right? Because it is a private thing. Let's move on. All right. So 2 little quick videos just that we wanted to share with you guys as well that give just a perspective around vaccines, perspective.
My name is Dr. David Esho. I'm a family doctor working.
Just a perspective on vaccines from professionals who self-identify as Black and have been, working throughout the pandemic. So we wanted to share that with you guys. So bear with me here. Let me get this into that screen. And I think you see this fine. I'm looking on my screen just to see that it does go over to the video. Give me 1 sec. No, the screen has gone black. Okay, so. Okay, so resume share. Let's see, receive. So.
I'm happy to share too, Karen, if you'd like.
Oh, I think that'd be amazing.
Okay, no problem. Let me get the video up for you right now.
And otherwise, I can reshare I just have it right here as well. So I can. No, I have it. No.
If you struggle to lose weight, you must see this.
Got it.
A fat-dissolving loophole has just been leaked that can dissolve 59 pounds of fat.
So you're not showing your screen right now, though, Karen?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought you were going to share yours. I'm sorry. I misunderstood that.
Well, just want to make sure right now I can hear your audio. Perfect.
It's the reason why some people are skinny from birth.
Could you stop your video though, Sharon?
Let's pause. Let me pause the video because no one can see what is happening. I'm not playing that video. I don't have a video playing.
Oh, you're not?
This is playing from somebody else's. This is not me. I have this closed.
There we go.
Okay, so you guys should now be able to see the Okay, so guys, I'm just going to stop sharing and resharing. Generally, I don't find I have to do this for Zoom. And I also find that I'm like a Teams master. Like when your organization uses one online platform or another. If this was Teams, all over it, guys. So I'm going to restart the share now. And I think, we just have to be gracious with each other. It's thank gosh, I'm not being graded for this. And so let's get this video going. Here we go. I can see that. You can see that now. Perfect. Just never give up. Here we go.
Dr. David Esho. I'm a family doctor working at Toronto Western Hospital. I've been involved in various aspects of the pandemic. I've worked on the COVID wards, been involved with testing in long-term care homes. Currently, I'm here today as part of one of my other jobs, working with the LFL-Vaccine initiative to improve vaccine uptake in the Black community. I saw it firsthand on the wards where, unfortunately, the vast majority of people who we saw admitted to hospital were Black and brown people. Often people who are working in jobs that are frontline. So a lot of people working in the grocery industry, working in transportation, taxi drivers, were often the people that we saw admitted to hospital. Being in healthcare, I'm not immune to the side effects of COVID. Been very isolated this year. I come from a large Nigerian family. We're big on getting together. We're big on socializing. We haven't been able to do that. I know that's taken a toll on me and taken a toll on my family. And I know a lot of you out there would probably say the same thing. My name is Dr. David Esho, and I got vaccinated for my family.
Perfect. So let's close that one and just one other one, guys. Thank you. So let's get her here.
My name is Dr. Trudy McFarlane, and I got vaccinated for my family, my friends, my church family, my community, and my patients. This Black African Caribbean community has been hit hard, and as we've seen, they've been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. We've seen more hospitalizations and deaths within our communities. It speaks to the importance of these clinics where you can have trusted healthcare providers who are well-informed and can provide evidence-based details and information to help support your vaccination decisions. Representation is so important because you are interacting with people who you may be able to relate to and also trust. You can be vulnerable with, you can be yourself. And the great thing about some of these clinics is that people have felt comfortable enough to kind of share their deepest concerns. We can come to an agreement or have them feel more comfortable about making their decision to vaccinate.
Okay, so
This revolution.
thank you very much for indulging me in watching those videos. Really, another purpose for sharing those videos is in case people are not aware that there are Black targeted vaccine clinics, initiatives, providers who can be accessed that maybe you're just not aware of. So we just wanted to also share this for simple awareness raising. So now I'd like to go ahead and let Dr. Odami take over and open us up just with a little bit of information on vaccine hesitancy, giving us more of a current state feel of where things stand. And so, Dr. Odami, please feel free to go ahead. Thank you.
Is my screen showing?
Yes, we can see your screen, Dr. Odami.
Okay. So what I wanted to do really was, having sat on the Black Scientists Vaccine Initiative, promoting equity in vaccines, I have learned that the hesitancy is based on many factors. And I think one of the points I want us to understand is that vaccines are only one component of a whole array of activities we have to undertake to minimize the pandemic, to defend ourselves against the pandemic. And this applies to COVID and other respiratory viruses as well. So this Swiss cheese concept suggests that none of these steps are completely perfect. They have holes in them. So you have multiple holes, but if you line them all together, physical distances, wearing a mask, taking personal responsibility in terms of hygiene, hand washing, whom you visit, and then the shared responsibilities of not going to public places, or making sure that ventilation is, you go where ventilation is good, you follow public health messages, you quarantine and isolate when necessary, particularly if you're living with vulnerable people, immunocompromised people, and then with the vaccines. So it's a whole array of steps, personal responsibilities, shared responsibilities that help us fight the pandemic. And people are big on the personal responsibilities where they are vocal that this is my own decision. But we live as a society and we have shared responsibilities to society as well. So one should not think about himself or herself alone, but think of the other person as well. There are an array of vaccines, and I just want you to be reassured that if you don't like one particular type of vaccine, particularly the RNA and DNA vaccines, there are other vaccines that are really coming in the pipeline, protein-based vaccines, and Canada is playing a role in here, and the usual sort of standard vaccines. Some people have argued that, oh, this vaccine technology is new. I'm not too confident that I want to take it yet because it's a new technology. And these are the various technologies that we see with vaccines. We know whole vaccines where the virus, whole virus vaccines where the virus has been inactivated, killed, or attenuated. These are standard vaccines. We take some of them in childhood. Or you can have viral vectors where you use a virus as a chaperone. And this was the example of the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, where an a cold virus is used as the Trojan horse that carries the DNA material into the cell. And then we have the messenger RNA vaccine, which is the main component of the vaccines that we have had in Canada, where the messenger RNA information is packaged in a fat bubble, and that is administered to the recipient. But of late, I think you are hearing the news, Canada has been front and center of developing a virus-like particle produced in plants for those who worry about animal sources and worry about whether human embryo cells have been used. There are vaccines coming that come from plant source, which should eliminate that kind of worry about these vaccines. And then one of the things that I've noted that people are really a little nervous about, they are nervous about the rapid pace that the COVID vaccines have been developed compared to the standard traditional vaccine development timeline. And what I want you to understand is that you can see that none of the steps have been missed in the accelerated vaccine development timeline. Rather, it is the timing and the organization of the vaccine development. So in standard clinical trials, you have people, industries who invest in preclinical testing. They do phase 1 studies where they are studying a few patients, looking at the safety and the side effects. And then once there is evidence that they can proceed, there's more investment put in. They go to the next stage, they collect the data, there's more investment. In phase 3, they are testing tens of thousands of patients compared with placebo. And then it's at this phase that they begin to sort of set up the infrastructure to produce the vaccine. And then they set up the whole process of manufacturing and they get approval before there's distribution. So this takes, as you can see, almost 7 to 10 years to develop. And that is true about all the vaccines we've had previously. But hardly have we had to develop a vaccine during a pandemic. If we didn't have a pandemic, there would have been no impetus to do this in a hurried way. But people were dying. Humanity was faced with a new virus that was life-threatening, that we hadn't seen before, and there was the need to develop it at a fast pace. But as you can see, all the steps are there, except that they were occurring concurrently. So rather than wait for it to be in series, there were overlaps. So you were doing the studies, but overlapping them. And then there was heavy investment between partnerships between industry and government and scientific society to invest money in the infrastructure, even when we didn't know that these vaccines were going to work. And that was a risk we were all ready to take because of the nature of the pandemic. And so once all these results were being generated, they were being reviewed at the same time. And the manufacturing process started before there was final approval and distribution of the vaccine. So this has been compressed into a shorter time. And I have to say, thank goodness we're able to do that, because we couldn't wait for 7, 8 years with COVID virus lurking around and killing us. So I want to say that for those who are hesitant about the messenger RNA vaccines, which has been probably the earliest ones and the ones that Canada has adopted, I want to really dismiss one fear. And there's this whole social media hype that somehow the vaccine can enter your DNA. The truth is that humans have no ability to convert messenger RNA to DNA. So if you're being given Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, there's no possibility of the messenger RNA entering your DNA. We can only convert DNA to messenger RNA, but not the other way. So vaccines do not contain the tools to make human DNA at all. And in the AstraZeneca vaccine, it is not DNA packaged into adenovirus, and the virus uses its ability to infect our cells to transmit the message. With the messenger RNA, rather than use a virus to enter it, one uses it directly in a fat bubble, injects into your muscle, and that enters your cell directly. So this gives the information to make proteins from the information that the messenger RNA or the DNA provides. So there's no reason to fear that somehow this is going to enter your DNA and become a permanent feature of who you are. There's been a lot of concern about the side effects of the vaccines. And indeed, there is no vaccine or medicine that has no side effects. And these side effects and adverse events are being collected very regularly in big databases for us to understand. So this is showing you a study of comparing the side effects of taking a vaccine and actually getting COVID infection. So the COVID infection is yellow, the vaccination side effects is blue. And as you can see, look at acute kidney injury. Yes, you could have some side effects from the vaccine, but it's far less than if you got COVID infection. Appendicitis is almost the same. Abnormal heart rhythm, arrhythmias, you can see that although you can have a little bit of it with the messenger RNA vaccines, it is far worse if you got COVID. Clots. If you're using the messenger RNA vaccines, in my last webinar organized by Sickle, I talked about a distinct clot that is caused by just the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. The messenger RNA vaccines are not associated with a lot of clots, but if you have COVID, nearly 40 to 50% of COVID patients who are in hospital develop blood clots. What I want you to look at is the fear about myocarditis and pericarditis, which is a distinct and well-known side effect of messenger RNA vaccines, particularly in young adults and young adolescents. You can see that although you can get myocarditis and you can get pericarditis, which is the inflammation of the covering of the heart, it is far higher if you develop COVID. So my message, and then if you look at pulmonary embolus, it is far higher if you got the infection. So my message to you is that it's a kind of a risk balance. Am I at a higher risk of taking a vaccine or a higher risk of getting COVID infection? And the answer is overwhelmingly, it favors taking the vaccine. And this is showing the data in a different form for acute injury. The only side effect that is more pronounced in taking the vaccine is swelling of your lymph nodes. And that's part of the way the vaccine works. When your arm is injected, the vaccine effect first goes to your lymph nodes that participates in the immune reaction that leads to you forming antibodies against the virus. But the good news is that we don't only have vaccines, we now have treatments available, monoclonal antibodies. And there are two that have been championed in Canada, approved, and in Ontario. There's this one, which is casirivimab, and imdevimab, which is a combined monoclonal antibody. And there's the sotrovimab. And what they do is that they bind to the spike protein of the virus. And when they bind to it, it prevents the virus entering the cell. So they sort of block the virus ability to enter the cells. But this have to be given very early in the infection because you want to stop the virus entering the cell. So it's no use when you've had the infection for more than 9 days. So it has to be within 9 days. And this is helpful when you don't have any immunity against the virus, because if you have immunity, then you're doing exactly, you have what it takes to block the virus from entering. So there are tests to test whether you have previous COVID infection or whether you've been vaccinated or whether you have immunity. And if you don't have immunity, then you are a candidate to get this monoclonal antibody is recommended. Or if the patient is very sick and one cannot gather all this information. So we are lucky to have interventions that also help if you really get an infection. And it is the same if you want to use this to stop symptoms very early in the infection. So people get severe infection symptoms, you can stop the disease course by making it milder. And if you have been previously exposed to the virus or you are fully vaccinated, then they test whether you are immunocompromised or not. And if you are immunocompromised, then you are likely to receive the monoclonal antibody. But if you are not immunocompromised and you've already been protected through vaccination, then this is not recommended. But we have to choose wisely because these treatments are expensive. And so the combination of casirivimab and imdevimab is for those who don't have immunity and those who are critically ill. The sotrovimab is being used for post-exposure prophylaxis. So somebody who is high risk, who has a high risk factor and has been exposed to COVID can receive this as a way of blocking any infection. Or if you are about 50 years, you are in indigenous population and you have one of these factors. And I'm glad to see that if you look at the risk factors that have been enumerated by the Ontario Science Table, you can see that sickle cell disease is one of them. And then there's the oral medication, which is now available, which is a combined therapy of nematicillin, which is an active drug, which reduces the viral replication. And the other one actually doesn't act on the virus, but actually potentiates the nematicillin. And this is for mildly ill patients who don't require oxygen supplementation. And it has to be very early, within 5 days of onset. So we have a combination of public health measures, vaccines that are effective, and some therapeutic interventions that also mediate fighting the disease. And not only that, doctors are now more experienced in managing severely affected patients. And all these contributions are combining to improve outcomes for COVID infection. It's not often that I have a lot of very good news for sickle cell patients, but I have to tell you, for those of us who treat sickle cell, we were very, very apprehensive that because sickle cell patients are susceptible to viruses and can have respiratory infections and can go into acute chest syndrome, we were scared that we would see an avalanche of acute chest syndrome in sickle cell patients. But that has not been the case. And it's interesting that what is the data that is being gathered, this data from France, and what I want you to focus on is that this positive serology is your antibody level, suggesting that these sickle cell patients have been exposed to COVID. So when you look at COVID outcomes only in hospitalized patients, you are only looking at the severe end of it. You don't see all those who get COVID at home or who get it mildly. and don't even know that they've got COVID. The only way you can know that is to measure antibodies in their blood. So the way to do that is to go among the patient population, test their blood to see who has antibodies. If you have antibodies and you've not been vaccinated, then it means you've been exposed to the virus. And when they did this early in the course of the pandemic in France, they realized that nearly 19% of their patients actually had been exposed to COVID, but very few had been admitted to hospital, suggesting that, yes, sickle cell patients are exposed to the virus, but they certainly have an ability to fight the infection. And one of the data that is really turning out is the production of this kind of protein in the blood called interferon. These are patients who are AA, they don't have sickle cell, and these are patients who have SS. And if you can see, the amount of interferon circulating in the SS patient is astronomically higher compared to those. So these are all African people of African background, but you can see the high expression of interferon. What is also realized is that the antibody level drops so quickly in sickle cell patients that although they get the infection or get the vaccine, they are more likely to drop the antibody level low. What does this tell us? It tells us that sickle cell patients really need to be protected, and they need to be boosted as well because the antibody level drops quickly. However, when sickle cell patients get exposed to the virus, because of their high interferon level, what interferon does is that it acts against the virus and reduces the expression of the receptor. The receptor is the kind of the lock that the spike protein has to attach to enter the cell. And sickle cell patients have high interferon level, which sort of blocks that ability to enter the cell. So they are more susceptible in that their immunity wanes, but they are able to fight against the virus entering the cell, which is good news. And in fact, in our population, we've seen very few children, and even indeed in adults, who have had to be admitted to ICU because of COVID. That's good news for sickle cell patients. And on that note, I will end to say that we have reason to know that after billions of these vaccines have been delivered, that these vaccines are protective, they work, they are not perfect, but in combination with other measures and other therapeutic opportunities we can breathe some air of confidence and know that the future seems brighter than it was when COVID broke. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Adami. I feel like that was like a perfect beginning. Oh, I can see I'm duplicate. That's fine. Anyways, that was a perfect beginning to our day today, and really just to help people appreciate some information that helps around knowing, like the interferon piece for me was really interesting that you were just speaking about. And the other piece I found interesting too was the lymph node swelling, like when you're looking virus versus COVID, you know, what do I, do I get vaccinated, or do I, look at actually what happens if I get COVID? And that lymph node swelling is the one thing that, yes, is higher if you get the vaccine, but all the other things, it really was the risk of having COVID. I feel like those details were good to get us started. So thank you for sharing that. So we're going to move into now, I'm going to call on Sandra, and let me pull up your slides here. I can do that. Oh, let me put them on display first. And so Sandra's going to talk to us about vaccine acceptance or hesitancy. And I believe you can see the slides. No, I don't.
Let me know if you want me to launch them, Karen. I'd be happy to.
And there, I think we should be good. Please tell me, do you see them?
I see your screen, but it's your desktop. Not yet. I know they're coming.
Thank you. I appreciate your confidence. I really do. You are
Name of the event, confidence.
They are coming. Here you go.
Hey, that looks familiar. All right. Thank you so much, Karen. I really need to thank Dr. Odame as well, not just because he's created an incredibly tough act to follow with my little share this morning, but because I think if we want to understand vaccine acceptance or hesitancy, we need to understand what it is that we're asking people to consider, right? Taking into their bodies, for what purpose and with what outcomes. Having that science, understanding, that foundational knowledge, as Karen called it when we started, is so important. And I'm glad that it precedes the things that the rest of the panel will be talking about, because we do need to know what we're making a decision about. And as you saw from those wonderful graphs and very knowledgeable guide through all of the data, seeing can be believing, at least that's our hope. So for my piece, I really wanted to just introduce some of the just an appreciation of what decision-making can involve when it comes to your health. I won't take a lot of your time this morning, but I do want to, I hope, build some appreciation and empathy as we consider decisions for our health and what others choose to do as well around their health. Acceptance, hesitancy, any kind of decision-making about health is complex and layered just by nature. So if we go to the next slide, I'll be able to share a bit with you about what we know. As you might imagine, over the past 2 years or more, there's been quite a bit of effort, scholarship, research done just to understand not just vaccines and how they work in our bodies to fight infection like COVID-19, but also what people are doing as they contemplate and try to decide for themselves and possibly in the case of our audience today, decide on behalf of others, perhaps children, other members of the family, what their stance will be on vaccines. And in a very changing climate, I think it is helpful to understand that this is a complex issue and one that requires and incorporates a lot of things. So my first point just talks about some of the factors that researchers have found are so important and involved in decision-making about vaccines and the COVID-19 vaccine in particular. Certainly we need to start with individual pieces, but I hope it becomes clear that it's an inside and outside job. It's also the contexts we find ourselves in, the nature of the information we're getting, and where we are at any point. As the course of the infection wave has changed, I would say things have also changed on an individual level. There are a number of things operating at once. So just coming from that psychology point of view and wanting to understand behavior, health behavior and thinking, we want to appreciate that there are beliefs that are incorporated in making decisions about vaccines and any healthcare point actually, and that we don't do that in isolation. We're part of cultural contexts, we're part of families, we're part of groups. We heard the doctors in the video that were shared with us earlier, Drs. Esho and McFarlane, even talking about their families and their churches and all of the places we find ourselves, pardon me, those are all influencing us as we are influencing them. So there's a lot of back and forth going on. Importantly, for anybody making a decision is to think about what has happened before. And as many of us that are dealing with sickle cell disease come from racialized backgrounds, there may be that interplay as well with how we've been treated in healthcare settings by providers. And it doesn't have to be around vaccination. It could be at any point that we were seeking healthcare support. So people are reflecting on what has happened in the past and thinking about what to do currently. And speaking of currently, they're also thinking about their own health and how they perceive it right now. How do I see myself? Do I see myself as vulnerable to this particular disease? Yes, COVID-19 news was all around us and news of various quality. Did we have connection with people who were ill? Do we ourselves, given what we consider our health state, feel that I need this to be healthier and to have good protection and a good chance against this virus? So one is reflecting on the past and also making calculations all the time, believe it or not, about how healthy we feel, how vulnerable we feel. And once we understand where we're situated currently, then we're starting to think about the future. What are the chances that I'm going to encounter this thing and that it will be important for me to take steps today to protect me in the future? I hope it's already becoming clear that it is never sort of just a one-time decision made, but many, many things that we're incorporating or trying to make sense of it. I do hope that that slide's coming through clearly for people. Let us know. It may just be a connection issue. But I'll just continue with the remaining points. Information, such as the information that we just received from Dr. Odami, is so important. Very difficult to think about any of the factors I've already discussed if you don't understand the scope of the issue and its relevance to you personally. So one of the things that we've been noticing, if you've been paying attention to news or reading any of the research literature or just talking with other people, is that information about COVID-19 is coming from a variety of sources. And people have different ways that they're weighting that information. We may hear from people in the Ministry of Health or government or other agencies about what is known. But the way that we translate it for our circumstance, the way that we think about its relevance for us, is much more often influenced by local things, the relationships in our families, our immediate experiences, knowledge of others that are dealing with COVID-19, for example. These are the things that we are tending to rely on and maybe weigh just as equally as we might, or more so than information coming from people we don't really have a connection with, but are in charge of setting mandates and information about the way we treat and tackle something like COVID-19. So quality of information, as I will mention again later, is of huge importance, and also how we process it. And the next point I put here is just that we need to understand that as human beings, we carry inherent bias in the way that we see the world and do things. And I'm not saying that bias is a good or bad thing, but it's important to acknowledge that it exists and how it is influencing what we do. So when we think about new information, we are considering the source, we are considering how believable or credible that source is, and we're also always weighing whether or not that should influence what we do. And we may see things through the lens of our history and experience, and then there's that extra cognitive task, psychological task of trying to incorporate new things and thinking about how to fit it in. Are we going to shift our current position, or are we going to incorporate that new info and stay where we started? So many, many things going on, and the list could even be longer. Again, just hoping to build an appreciation for what a complex task decision-making about health can be. And it explains why it is hard for people to, even in the face of what we consider abundant evidence that something like COVID-19 vaccines are helpful, useful, valuable, should be obtained. We need to understand that there will always be room for that doubt, that uncertainty based on some of the things I've already mentioned, and that people are trying to find their way as best they can. I'm glad that seminars like this exist as another source of information for those who are contemplating what to do. The next thing I just wanted to mention with reference to those factors I've already shared with you is that they are changing all the time too. So I don't think anybody listening today needs to be told that during the last 2 or more years that we have been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, that information about it has changed, variants have emerged, the virus itself is on the move and morphing, as are our tools for trying to address it. So a lot of things are happening at once at any point during the past 2.5 years. And of course, if we have come into something like COVID-19 pandemic with our own health vulnerabilities or needs, we're changing too. So how one understands one's health at any point is changing. Information from outside is changing, as I mentioned. The kinds of experiences with people in our local circle are changing. These things are not so-called stable, but always on the move. And then I mentioned context already. We don't live in isolation, but we do rely on people around us for various things. And it turns out that those that are making decisions about the COVID-19 vaccine are also thinking about those that are implementing these big programs around vaccination or setting our agenda as a nation or what have you, or a municipality around safety and so on. And we're always thinking, how much do we trust that source? Do we even feel connectedness to that source? That doesn't mean needing to know our ministers and other people personally, but it does mean feeling seen by them and feeling like our personal experience and struggles, challenges, what have you, are understood by those individuals and incorporated in their decision making. It seems that when people feel like those that are setting the agenda are truly appreciating their circumstance, there is that increased openness to what they are trying to promote and share. So I'll just move over to the next slide for some wrapping up points on this. I do hope that if there are questions about this later, people won't hesitate to ask, but just continuing with that appreciation of the complexity of what's involved. I've mentioned many factors on the previous slide and in our, just in the sharing right now that go into complexity and hesitancy. And this just references the fact that there's quite a lot of information about the behavioral side of the COVID vaccine piece. Although large trends are helpful to know, and I have shared some just points distilled from lots of studies, we always need to come back to the level of the individual, don't we? We always need to think about our immediate context relationship. These are the things that are important to us that predict what we will do. Just as I have mentioned that all of those factors that influence change all the time to different degrees, decision-making is also something that can change. So you learned about the 3 C's through Karen's introductory slides. And here I would just say that people are always on a continuum in terms of decision-making. Even when one's been made, some would say the deliberation continues. So decision-making is also something we need to understand as event-based. So even if I've had the first vaccine, I need to make a new decision when I'm offered another and then another, and things like the third, or a booster, as some have called it, and others will say that it's just one more in a series as needed to confer protection against COVID-19. We need to understand that if the overall task of making decisions is difficult, it's renewed each time somebody's presented with a new option. Wonderful to have options, also difficult just as a cognitive task to make decisions each point. It is taxing. We've heard expressions like decision fatigue, and those do enter in here. But I do think it's important that people, to understand that people may have a belief about accepting COVID-19 vaccines and the series that's offered, but have a completely different point of view when speaking maybe about childhood immunizations and other forms of vaccination. Those could be, for some of the reasons, likely for some of the reasons that Dr. Odame has referenced, the way that this rollout of vaccines has come and what people understand or think should be the norms around that, the time taken, whatever, how long something's existed, et cetera. So just again, to appreciate that there are many factors that need to be brought in at each point. And I just wanted to close this share with just talking again about appreciating the factors, yes, but thinking about where we get our information and how very important it is for people, no matter what influences are operating around them, to make sure that they're obtaining information that fits their particular circumstance, that is tailored, in other words. And thankfully, we have wonderful physicians, nurses, other members of the healthcare team who will know us well and be able to speak about eligibility for certain types of early treatment forms. We saw that in the previous presentation, or can speak about risks and benefits as they present for us in particular. So important when weighing a whole overwhelming amount of information to always whittle it down to the personal relevance. And I'll close there, just wanting to thank folks for the opportunity to share. And I hope building some empathy for ourselves and for those around us as we try to navigate a complex circumstance. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Newton. We really appreciate that. I agree, it was a very helpful framework to consider things from the work that's involved in decision making and the environments and the different influences that impact that. So thank you very much for sharing your perspective. We're going to move into Sinthu next. And Sinthu, you're welcome to go ahead and share your slides when you're ready and get started. Thank you again, Dr. Newton.
Hi, everyone. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
It's full screen?
It is full screen. You are good to go. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Hi, good morning. My name is Sindhu. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Adami and Dr. Newton before me, speaking about the vaccine from the cellular level to the individual level. And now I'd like to go kind of to the social level. Someone I care about is not vaccinated. How can I support them? Sorry. So I want to begin by saying that as a social worker, my goal is always to provide non-judgmental counseling. And this also applies to the topic of vaccine hesitance. And I really think that we can all tap into this approach to support people in our lives who are not vaccinated. So we might be quick to label someone who is not vaccinated as an anti-vaxxer, ignorant, uninformed. But this kind of conversation can be very alienating and exhausting. It really tears us apart and shuts people down. It also negates the fact that the concerns that people who are not vaccinated and people who are not vaccinated and also have sickle cell disease may have about the COVID-19 vaccine. And I do think that their concerns are valid and deserve being listened to and responded to with care. So some people with sickle cell disease, they might feel afraid and worried when it comes to the vaccine and how it's discussed. They might be triggered back to medical trauma or healthcare paternalism they've experienced. They might be feeling a bit overburdened with the vaccine. They may have been participating in clinical trials, and given the relative acceleration of the vaccine development, they might be feeling maybe over-researched. The point is, people's emotions, thoughts, and perspectives matter. And by trying to understand them and conveying empathy, you can really open up a space for conversation about the vaccine instead of shutting it down. So how do we do this? As a social worker, I draw from a range of counseling frameworks to support clients. And there's one called motivational interviewing, which I think we can draw from to support people throughout their decision-making process. This might be an alternative approach instead of the top-down approach. And I'd like to share a little bit about that today. So the first skill from motivational interviewing that we can apply to our day-to-day conversation is asking open-ended questions. So, you're with someone that you care about, and you notice that the conversation is beginning to enter the terrain of vaccination. You could ask for permission. Would it be all right if we had a conversation about the COVID-19 vaccine? And if yes, you could proceed with an open-ended question to keep the conversation going. So asking open-ended question it requires us to have open-ended thinking. So this means not assuming that the people who are unvaccinated are uninformed. In fact, people are probably doing a lot of research. So instead of asking a closed-ended question, are you vaccinated? Maybe we could ask, I'm curious, what is your understanding about the COVID-19 vaccine and sickle cell disease? And by asking an open-ended question, not only are we showing interest in that person's perspectives and thoughts and emotions, but we also get to learn about their ideas around change. The second skill that we can apply in our day-to-day conversations is providing affirmations. So what is to affirm? To affirm is to validate. It is to genuinely appreciate and recognize a person's strengths, as well as any movement, no matter how small it is, towards change. So to affirm requires us to really slow down and pay attention. It may not be an obvious change, but it might be a slight shift or nuance. So as I said before, people might be doing research about the vaccine, even though they may not be yet vaccinated. The fact that they're doing research is something to validate and to affirm. We could say, you're right. It's important to do your research to make informed decisions about your health. So the final skill that we could apply in our day-to-day conversations is reflective listening and summarizing. So here we invite the person that we care about to give some feedback by providing some paraphrasing about what they just said. And the reflection piece, we can go a step further, by slowing down and tapping into empathy, we can reflect back what the person means. And this is their hopes and values. So the person who's not vaccinated, but is doing their research, if we slow down, we might hear that making informed decisions is very important to them. Their health is also very important to them. And they're going to think this through. We could say to them, what matters most to you is that you make informed decisions that keep you and your family as healthy as possible. So this kind of reflective listening and summary, it's an invitation to keep the conversation going. And it affirms incremental change, no matter how small. So what? Okay, so some takeaways I'd like you to walk away with include people's thoughts, emotions, and values are important, and this is also when it comes down to the decision to take the COVID-19 vaccine. By labeling people, and this can be done in unintentional ways, we're really shutting down the conversation. And also, we might even be doing harm and minimizing structural inequities when we put sickle cell disease into social context. And Delaney is going to speak more about that next. So the spirit of motivational interviewing can be helpful to keep the conversation going and support change. I think this is vital because it lets people know that we're there for them, vaccinated or not. And things are always in flux. Change is inevitable. And we want to keep the invitation open so that the people that we care about can come back to us, talk to us, bounce off ideas, and get more information. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Cynthia. I've heard about motivational interviewing, quite a bit, and I really enjoy how you just gave us a nice snippet to take some pieces home. And there's at least one thing, you can think about and remember to try differently the next time you're with somebody. I liked the phrase open-ended questions require open-ended thinking, because we talk a lot about open-ended questions, but I don't know that we always the question starts from, like, you have to ensure that the thinking is open first to be able to truly ask an open-ended question. So that curiosity piece that you kind of expressed was really good. So thank you. I really enjoyed that. Mary did have a question for you. I've let her know we will ask it at the end. So you can peek in the chat. The question is there, but I do have it written down. So we'll do that at the end of the Q&A. Okay, we'll keep that aside for you. Thank you very much. Okay, so Delaney, thank you. It is, you are up and we appreciate your time.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I'd be remiss if I didn't commend the panelists who came before me. As you can see, I decided to go the low-tech route because any presentation deck I would have created would have paled in comparison to the ones that have been presented before me. I come to this conversation today from an interesting vantage point. Of the panelists you've heard from today, I'm probably the most removed from frontline care. As Karen so kindly and eloquently introduced earlier at the top of the session, I'm a lead within Ontario Health in the Equity, Inclusion, Diversity, and Anti-Racism Office. I also sit on the board of directors for Sickle. So if you hear my biases come through, that's why. But following up on Sinthu's presentation, this entire panel really is to validate and affirm any of your hesitancy, any of your fears, concerns, misgivings about the vaccine. I also want to iterate that those concerns, fears, and misgivings aren't unfounded. For many of us, there's lived experience, there's historical trauma, there's systemic racism. These are just a few of the items that actually go into kind of informing or serving as the impetus as to why the decision to get vaccinated or the limiters in building vaccine confidence kind of exist. So as I mentioned, my vantage point kind of serving at the role, I don't want to say provincial government, but an agency of the provincial government. I served in the capacity of a project manager during the initial first wave with the COVID-19 Pandemic Response Secretariat. And during that time, data was really all we were trying to gather. COVID-19 was a very, very sneaky, mischievous virus. There wasn't much known about it. The variables were unknown and growing, never ending at that point in time. And in that capacity, much of what I was supporting was just the response. It was a full-on crisis. We were developing guidance. We were trying to figure out how best to serve the folks who had recently contracted the virus, doing all we could in the form of infection prevention and control, equipping folks with PPE, understanding how the virus spread, whether it was airborne or aerosol generated, developing guidance, and the list goes on. Whilst all of that, in May of 2020, the George Floyd murder occurred, and there was this heightened attention to equity, inclusion, diversity, and anti-racism. Well overdue, but nonetheless, it finally appeared. And we saw this collective movement in terms of appreciating equity and appreciating that the lived experience for all Ontarians wasn't the same. With that being said, the expertise for embedding equity into all things that we do was still quite early on. For many practitioners, for many of the government agencies or health system partners, they're still on that learning journey about what it means to embed equity and to respond to the disparities that are impacting communities at disproportionate levels. I was fortunate enough to get integrated into the equity office and began to see the intersection between disparities, or the intersection between race and disease. So primarily, I've been working most specifically on supporting the Black Health Plan at a provincial level and understanding the disparities and inequities that are interfering with the ability for Black communities and Black populations across Ontario, including, there's been an over or a disproportionate level and burden of disease in the Black community. There's been an inability to, access services or delivery of care. And then there's also just an increased risk of illness. We've learned throughout these many waves of the pandemic and, ongoing pandemic, because it hasn't come to an end, albeit we're removing masks and the impetus to protect yourself has waned. The pandemic still does continue. But we learned that many folks from marginalized communities across the province were unable to access vaccines, whether it be initially the modalities for booking an appointment was strictly online. And that impacted folks who were working on the front line, didn't have access to a computer during the day jobs, or didn't have the luxury of working from home during the pandemic. They could have still been working in factories or working in essential services like the grocery stores or serving food, etc. We realized that this disproportionately impacted a number of groups, and what we needed to do was attend to that. The vaccine was presented at first as something that could, hopefully equip everyone with the necessary protection to avoid prevention or prevent infection and also prevent the spread of the virus. But what happened was initially, I think there was this collective thinking that once the vaccine was delivered, everybody would go out to get it. Well, there are many folks who were unable to receive it. And on top of that, there are many folks who were afraid to receive it. I think a lot of the powers that be initially thought the vaccine in itself would provide the level of confidence for folks to go out and receive it. But what we were seeing was the populations who required it most were the ones who were not receiving it. So for instance, there in the 2016, the data in Toronto shows that Black people, for example, account for 14% of reported cases in the city, while only making up 9% of the overall population. And there's a similar disparity when it pertains to hospitalization rates among Black populations or Black Torontonians, where there are 353 out of every 100,000 cases of Black Torontonians were hospitalized, compared to the overall hospitalization rate of only 201 to 100,000 people. And then on top of that as well, in Black residents of Hamilton represented nearly half of all COVID-19 cases, 7% in self-identified members of its racialism's community. And Black people are only about 14% of the population, and the racialized population makes up less than a quarter, 19% of Hamilton's total population. So I essentially report these statistics to show you that those who are impacted most are the ones who aren't receiving the level of coverage and care. While I'm a member of the Equity Office, I've been actually serving on the Black Health Plan Working Group, which really and truly is oriented around three pillars: a safe and equitable response to the pandemic, ensuring that Black populations are prioritized during the health system recovery, and then the third pillar being sustaining health equity in the Black population. And one of our monthly or on a consistent basis, one of our activities was to collect and track the vaccine coverage in high priority communities. And the way we defined these high priority communities was a use of three different tools, one of them being the 2016 census data, economic deprivation index, and a material deprivation scale. And just to kind of provide a bit more detail about what those things are, the material deprivation scale is essentially understanding an inability for individuals or households to afford or consume goods or activities that a typical family would, and typical being, the general norm. So looking at these three indices, we were able to arrive at about 114 communities that were high priority. And we could think of sickle cell disease patients or sickle cell disease individuals living with sickle cell disease as a high priority community. And what we've seen amongst this high priority community assessment was that those who needed the vaccine most were the ones receiving it the least. Those who saw the highest risk of illness were receiving the actual least amount of vaccines. The reason behind that was back to, again, those fears, those elements of hesitancy that help to, whether it be dissuade you from getting the vaccine or just didn't instill enough confidence in you to actually go out and seek the vaccine. So organizations like the Black Physician Association of Ontario, which you saw the video earlier on in this session, understood the sociocultural elements that were impacting folks' necessary needs to go and get the vaccine. In partnership and collaboration with the Black Health Alliance and many community health centers, one being the Black Creek Community Health Center, which SCOGO has supported in delivering a vaccine clinic for folks who are living with sickle cell disease, they realized that many folks who want to get the vaccine but aren't sure or are receiving information from unfounded sources or through WhatsApp groups or through a variety of mechanisms, they need to be provided a safe, culturally sensitive, with the ambiance that they can feel calm and protected in. And that's exactly what they delivered. These self-determined, community-led interventions, these vaccine clinics that were made to speak to the needs of racialized, prioritized, or unprioritized or deprioritized and marginalized communities. These clinics were erected for the sole purpose of helping you come to a decision confidently about receiving the vaccine. And they're still ongoing to this date. I really want to reiterate or actually really reinforce the need for data and how this data will actually go on to serve the cause of informing our administration for the needs to respond equitably and proactively to the folks who are most marginalized and impacted by viruses such as COVID-19. Many of the sociocultural elements that I've spoken to or alluded to are, unfortunately just not captured at a widespread level. As I mentioned, we were using the 2016 census data kind of as a proxy to understand where these high priority communities are. We're advocating at a provincial level to have the government start to collect this race-based and ethnic origin data during OHIP registration or renewal, so we can have a better sense as to where people who are impacted by the virus most live and reside. And I think there needs to be essentially an association between outcomes like sickle cell disease and ensuring we understand where we live, where we are, and what are the different type of interventions we can provide to essentially ensure we have the coverage and protection that is afforded to many of folks who don't have the same unearned disadvantages as members of our community do. So I say all of that to just reinforce that what was founded by the great presentation from Dr. Odame about the utility of the vaccine for many folks kind of escapes their general conversation. Those messages and those items may not get received by the folks who need it most for a variety of reasons. And with that same being said, for folks who may not be, still aren't really necessarily confident to receive the vaccine, with the advent of new interventions such as the oral antiviral therapies, there still is a dearth of information about what are the steps necessary to go and actually access the therapies, where the clinical assessment centers you need to go and check into, what's the suite or the window of time where you need to actually present with symptoms to go and be, a qualified candidate to receive the antivirals. There's a wealth of information that needs to get into your hands. And this is one of the ways we're trying to do our best to ensure we provide those equitable modalities for folks to understand what is available to them, what protective use these different therapies and interventions have. And I think this presentation just speaks to the need for speaks to how we're actively trying to engage folks who are within this community, engage folks and their networks to ensure that the information they need and are equipped and can equip them with the information to be confidently able to make a decision that's best for their health and for their loved ones. So I just want to once again commend my panel. I think you've been provided with a wealth of information. I'm hoping I was able to also help, consolidate things from a system perspective and just reassure you that there are a number of different things we're doing to ensure that the equitable reach of these vaccines is being achieved. And I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Delaney, for bringing, another perspective. Like, I really enjoyed our panel today because we kind of brought things really from a variety of perspectives, really looking at the medical, looking at the psychology behind it. Now let's look at some psychosocial, and look at psychosocial more from a perspective of, I know someone who's struggling. How do I help them? Or, I know someone who's really hesitant. Is there something I could be doing differently, and not to create more exclusion for them? How can I ensure they still feel supported by me? And then we moved into Delaney's looking at, from a government perspective, more policy. How did decisions get made? What are the factors that need to be considered, all the details? So hopefully you got a nice spread there. I would invite my panelists, please, to go ahead and turn their cameras on, as we're going to start to move into our Q&A at this point. It is 11:22, so we have a nice chunk of time. I would say at least 30 minutes if we wanted to really take up that whole time to ask some questions of our panelists. Now, I do have some from the chat, and the very first person I want to call upon actually is Marcia Plummer, who was patiently waiting since Dr. Odami's presentation. So Marcia, please, if you wanted to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question first, we could start there. And if not, I will start with one from the chat. I could do that while you're unmuting yourself. So I'm going to go, Marcia, and then you can go. I'll definitely, if you want to jump in anytime, feel free. But there was one in the chat, so I'll just jump into that one. So Mary asked, what if all the info is from bad sources? And this goes to Sinthu. And so Sinthu, if you remember, great, what part of your kind of, when you're presenting, if you can answer that question for us, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So basically, so the skills that I shared is kind of the framework of how to have the conversation, right? So in the beginning, I thought this should have been a slide of its own afterwards, but one of the questions, like you have to ask permission. May I, would it be okay to talk about this? So, and having that framework, what you could do is ask for permission about, may I share some information from, like a hematologist or scientist. So you could use that framework as a way to introduce accurate information. Sometimes it does involve slowing down a lot, right? When I've had these counseling conversations on vaccine hesitance, it really does involve slowing down a lot, right? And sometimes they'll be like, no, I don't want that information. So you respect that. But yeah, my perspective is change is always going to happen. Sometimes they might say yes, and then, okay, this is an information sheet that, our hematologist put together, right? And that's something I could share. So that's how I would do it. And I don't know if anyone else has anything else to share, but that's kind of my approach.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add on to that? And if not, we do have other questions, but I'll give a couple minutes if anyone wanted to add to that.
Just to add that one of the simple analogies I gave, and we often don't think of it that way. I mean, nobody, if they have plumbing issues in their house, goes to sort of call just anyone and say, give me advice. You know that you have to go to an expert to fix your plumbing. In the same way, when issues of health come, your family doctor, the people who care about your health, go to them. They seek your interest and they will offer you information. And I think that guide is always a good guide for us to go to trusted sources and not listen to the noise that is going on in the background. We need the experts in the field to provide us the information we need. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Perfect addition and good timing with that one. Marcia, are you online and ready? Nope. All right, we've got others.
Actually, Karen, if I could, I see that Marcia has added her question to the Q&A. The third one, it's a request for some more information from Dr. Odame's presentation.
All right, so let me peek at that. And is that exactly what it says? Let me see. Bam. If Dr. Odame could review again the section on DNA and mRNA and the importance of boosters. Thanks for your question, Marcia, and great to see you, by the way.
Thanks, Marcia. So I think the whole COVID vaccine initiative began with an innovative vaccine production mechanism that had not been seen before. And so when it came on the scene, it created a lot of questions. Look, this is new technology. How sure are we that this is going to work? And then we started mentioning DNA, messenger RNA. Boy, you're talking about the blueprint of who I am. And you want me to just go and trust government and take something that is called RNA, DNA into my body when this has not been done before? So there was a legitimate sort of apprehension, and people had questions. And I think what many people decided to do was to wait and see, which is a reasonable strategy. If something is happening and you wait and see what is going to happen, let the guinea pigs go first, you know, and then once I know it's safe, I can join the line. And that was the approach. That people won't say it, but that was, they will seek information. They will seek information, as Intu said. They will try to validate it again, seek more information, and then they become comfortable. But actually, those technologies have been developed. Actually, the messenger RNA technology was being targeted. It's being used to treat cancer. Okay, so you develop messenger RNA from the cancer cells that is unique and make the body produce antibodies against the cancer cells. And they were using it to produce vaccines against Ebola. And we all remember SARS-1. I think we all forget. SARS-1 is a cousin of SARS-2. And actually, Toronto was an epicenter, which actually quite a number of healthcare professionals died from it. And the difference between SARS-1 and SARS-2, SARS-1 was very, very deadly. And that was the virus's own undoing, because by killing its host quickly, it stopped dissemination. Okay, so, but SARS-2 was much smarter. The death rates were not as high, but that meant that it could be spread throughout the community, and more people will be infected, which ultimately caused more deaths than SARS-1. So those techniques were being developed, and when SARS-2 broke, they shifted attention from these areas and concentrated on producing a messenger RNA vaccine. And then Marcia wanted to explain, so our bodies have ability to, we have DNA, and the way our DNA produces protein is that before it produces protein, the DNA gets converted to messenger RNA. And the messenger RNA then latches on to something called ribosomes, which then start making the protein. We don't have the ability to reverse that. HIV viruses they have the mechanism, and that's how HIV viruses can stay in our bodies for long. So the viruses have the mechanism to do that, but we don't. And so one can be absolutely sure that when you receive messenger RNA, it's not going to enter your DNA. And the most reassuring thing is that messenger RNA only stays in your body for hours, a few hours, and it's degenerated. It's so unstable. That's why it has to be stored very cold. It has to be stored at lower than freezing temperatures. And it has to be in a delicate fat bubble. It goes into your body just for a few hours, releases the information, and it's dead. So it's not going to stay in your body and get incorporated in your DNA. I think this fact is important because DNA and genes, once you start talking about DNA and genes, you're talking about serious issues, and people tend to really, is this something I'm going to pass on to my children? Is this something I'm going to pass on to? In fact, I heard a story of a marriage that broke apart because the husband thought that if the wife received the Pfizer vaccine, she was going to pass it on to him. And that resulted in a divorce. And so that's the extreme, but people feel very, very nervous when you talk about DNA and you talk about genes, but the messenger RNA vaccines will not enter your DNA. It is impossible.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Odami. I'm sure a number of people wanted to hear about that again, so thank you for clarifying. The next question is from Yamisi, and it's for Sinthu. Please, how, and this actually came more than in one way. So this is Yamisi, and then someone else asked a very similar question. Please, how do you help the person who has their mind made up against the vaccine? No matter how you try to make them reason, provide reasons to them, they come up with reasons as to why they shouldn't. And someone else said something along the same lines around it, engaging someone who's unvaccinated, who you love, is one of your people. Like, how do you navigate that?
Great. So again, I think it goes back to the open mind, the open-ended questions, right? And slowing down, right? Slowing down. So if you have permission to have this conversation, right? We opened this webinar with a scaling question, right? So on a scale of 10, 1 to 10, how would you rate you being able to get vaccinated, right? That's something you could ask. And if they say, I'm at a 2, okay, tell me a little bit of why you're at a 2. And not a 1. So there's some reasons there, right? There's some reasons that you could tap into and explore, right? And ask, provide affirmation. Like, you really have to, as a counselor, you really slow down. So in your day-to-day conversations, I'm not asking you to be a counselor, right? But asking those open-ended questions and keeping that perspective that change is possible, right? So maybe the reasons that give you that they're at a 2 and not a 1, right? Those could be amplified a bit, right? And sometimes I've gotten to a point people will say, I think generally people will say that their health is important to them, right? And you might be able to. One interesting question I have asked is, suppose what would you need to see for you to be at a maybe 4, for example, right? What would you need to see? And that's that also gives reasons, and values, and changes as well. I think that's kind of the approach that I would have. And again, if anyone else has anything to share, feel free to jump in.
Cynthia, if I could, I love those keys that you keep sharing with us, the rate of the conversation, the curiosity, and along the line of curiosity, I am wondering if the conversation isn't always about, are you deciding, when will you decide, how can we get you to decide, and it is a little more staged, like a little slower. How about finding out where they're getting, what their inner and individual circumstance is? I know that I talked about some of those past, present, future things. I wonder if those can be some of the things that can be part of that curiosity-based discussion. Hey, tell me a bit about what you've already been through when it comes to decisions like this and your healthcare, and how do you see yourself today? Do you see yourself as it's doing pretty well? Do you think that there are vulnerabilities that concern you when you think about COVID-19? And in the future, as this unfolds and does what it will, what do you want to have on the other end? What kind of state do you feel like you want to be in and achieve, and how would you link that to what we do today? I'm always curious about people's information sources. I know that somebody asked about that, and maybe we'll get to that question soon. I'm always curious about where they are getting their information, and again, without judgment. How are you learning about this? What is informing your decision? Really eye-opening, right? And often makes sense based on what people are drawing their conclusions from. So I love the idea that we are on a journey together, and we go back and forth as the person is willing about where they're located. So thank you for your guidance too.
Thank you, Sandra. I really like also your question about exploring the past. I didn't cover that, but when you ask people about, have you ever made any like decisions like this before, you really tap into their values, right? And their reasons. And that's a source of information that can, you know, like bring change.
Thank you. I just want to address there's one other question in the Q&A I want to make sure we get to from Justin. This one is directed towards Delaney. Hi, Delaney, based on your experience at the intersection of public health and DEI, what type of difference in opinion / disposition towards vaccines do you see within the same racial group, i.e. Black, but within different socioeconomic classes? In other words, and it's posted there, so you know, or I could post in the chat if you need to read it. In other words, is there any correlation of vaccination hesitancy based on socioeconomic status, even within the same racial group?
Thank you, Justin. It's a great question. So you recall during my, my diatribe or presentation, whatever you want to call it, I indicated the 3 indices we're using to kind of help define where we should prioritize our vaccine interventions. And I mentioned the 2016 census, the economic deprivation and deprivation and material deprivation scale. And unfortunately, those 3 things really are indirect measures to help us indicate, where we should be dedicating resources or prioritizing vaccine interventions. Given that, 2016 to 2022, that's 6 years, folks may or not be living in the same area. And I should mention the 2016 census data gets down to the postal code level. So we're using FSAs, or the forward sortation area, which is the first 3 characters in your postal code, to determine where we're seeing a higher census of individuals who are of an ethnic origin, or Black, South Asian, East Asian, etc. And then we use the 2016 census data in collaboration to figure out, okay, you identified as Black in 2016. This was your postal code. This was your material deprivation scale. And we use that to kind of figure out, okay, how are the vaccines reaching these communities? What is the burden of illness, et cetera? So given that, there's no really clear-cut way for us to make an association between that stratification you just listed about, our individuals with this income getting more vaccine, or individuals from this socioeconomic status getting more vaccine, because the data, unfortunately, isn't really being collected to that level of detail. You can imagine race is a very sensitive topic from both the provider and the actual client kind of perspective. There's historical trauma there, like, what do you want my information for? How will it be used? Who owns it? How will it be accessed? What will it go on to kind of inform? And because of all of that history, because of that trauma, we're unable to really tease out that level of stratification to really, once again, get even more informed approach as to how to develop or deliver vaccine interventions, or understand the burden of illness according to different areas. So once I mentioned it pretty quickly, was that, we've been moving or trying to use these kind of shortcomings as pull factors for the Ministry of Health to begin integrating this kind of ethnic origin, race-based data collection in the OHIP renewal process, so that when we do have another pandemic, which is just the nature of things, there likely will be another kind of pandemic at some day, or hopefully not in the near future, but just talking brass facts, we'll be better prepared and more equipped to deliver these informed, targeted approaches to make sure the ones that need the actual interventions the most are receiving them. You'll see from the first vaccine campaigns were dedicated towards long-term care homes or congregate settings, because we knew where these people were. We understood where the incidence of disease was highest, and that's how we were able to go in and, we understood at that point in time that age and comorbidities and immunosuppression were some of the factors that, affected folks. And once again, the zeal for life was definitely there. So folks were quick to get the vaccine. But for many informed folks, like you mentioned, from different higher socioeconomic status or different education levels, you'll even see that disparity there. Some of the most informed people I know, were still very hesitant about getting the vaccine. So it's hard to really build a causative relationship between the two, but the correlations do exist, and without more data, we can't actually assess them. But I really do appreciate your question, because there's definitely more to unearth about that stratification, even within a racial group or a marginalized population like the sickle cell disease community.
And Delaney, on that issue, I think, could you shed some light on, because one of the silver linings, and I think I'm careful not to over make this point of COVID, is that it's unearthed a huge disparity in health outcomes. Because if you look at the comorbidities, I think one of the factors that the comorbidities are found more prevalent in African Canadians. So it removed the band-aid on the sore and made it gape and bleed for us to see. And will you shed some light on how this is really empowering and informing and enlightening Ontario Health to look at all those disparities across board?
I love the question. Thank you, Dr. Adame. So I mentioned really briefly, like you, and then, just to piggyback on that point, COVID-19 did not, like you mentioned, bring about these comorbidities or increase the incidence of these diseases in racialized communities. They existed long before, but have been completely awash or covered up with the health system always, I know we have limiting factors. There's a capacity issue or HHR issue, but the reality was COVID-19 just exacerbated the level of unearned disadvantages, the disparities amongst the Black community, and really it reinforced that there's no more, the administration was no longer beholden, we made the administration beholden to no longer overlook the incidence of disease and the outcomes that are impacting Black communities and racialized communities. So this was kind of what served the impetus for that Black Health Plan that I mentioned that's being developed by Ontario Health and is currently being reviewed by the ministry. This is what was born about the high priority community strategy, which is understanding how these comorbidities are being impacted and how we can start to begin to attend to the issues that are being disproportionately impacting racialized communities. So, and Dr. Dama, yourself, you sit on the working group that's working to develop a quality standard for sickle cell disease. And a quality standard really speaks to the threshold of care that individuals living with sickle cell disease are, deserve and merit when going into healthcare system. So it's been, it's one of those, it's like you mentioned, it's not like it's a silver lining. And I hear why you don't want to use that word. I don't want to say it's a blessing in disguise either, but one of the positives, like you said, Dr. Adame, to have come out of the COVID-19 pandemic has been this warranted attention to some of the incidence of disease, the outcomes and comorbidities that are plaguing a lot of marginalized communities, and there's no longer an opportunity for the powers that be to let those things go unresolved. So we fortunately have champions at these different levels of administration that are pushing these agendas forward. And I think with the consistent attention and your own advocacy and calling about for change, we're able to continue to pull us a bit closer as we advance equity in these communities. So thank you for bringing up that point, Dr. Adame.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. Okay. We have another question here from Uzima, and her question is, what strategies are being put in place to sensitize the sickle cell disease community on the importance of getting the COVID vaccine? I definitely, I can speak a bit, for sure, from a SCOGO perspective, there are different partnerships that take place. And so if I can be indulged to pull up a slide just for a brief moment here, I would love to do so. Oh, sorry, let me just get it onto display. But SCOGO does do a number of partnerships, as we know, and they're really very much all about education and raising awareness amongst the community. And so my picture is here. There we go. There we go. And so one strategy I would say is by partnering up with different community centers, such as Black Creek Community Health Center or Taibu, the Black Physicians Association of Ontario, as Delaney mentioned, they are creating clinics that are Black focused clinics. And so I'll pop that up, or I'll even put a link in the chat so you guys can look at that later. These clinics, so there's clinics that are targeted towards sickle cell patients, and I find through SCOGO and the information they push out on their Instagram, having forums such as this is one avenue. And then also looking at opportunities to partner on Black health in particular, knowing that there will be sickle cell patients within that. So then that's another strategy. So these pictures here are just a little collection of different partnerships, collaborations that SCOG was participated in order to spread the word amongst the Black community, and certainly for those particularly with sickle cell disease. My panelists, do you have any other ideas you wanted to share?
So if I may chip in, so I think one good thing about sickle cell patients is that vaccination is something that is front and center in sickle cell management, because sickle cell patients know because of their inability, their spleens don't work well right from early in the beginning, and while they are adults, that their care providers are fetish about vaccines. So that the notion, and then every time we talk about the flu vaccine, because we want to protect, make sure that patients are protected. So the sickle cell patients really appreciate the notion that vaccines are needed to protect them. And so in all the clinics, what we do is re-emphasize. We don't, it's not that we focus only on COVID, we focus on vaccines and whether there are gaps in the vaccine protection for the patient. And the conversation about COVID comes every time. So at every clinic encounter, and that's why we are advocating that there should be no sickle cell patient out there who doesn't have a specialized clinic to attend. And I think Ontario Health will help in that regard, where nobody is left just because of where they live, that they are not connected to. If you live in Toronto, you should be connected to Toronto General Clinic. If you're a child, to Sick Kids, so that there are people who are focusing on the specific issues that are of importance to sickle cell patients and can address them. And I have to say that perhaps one of the reasons why we've had a very low sort of in terms of burden and deaths among sickle cell patients, it's more because they take vaccination seriously, and many of our patients, that's not to say there's no hesitancy, there's still hesitancy, but I think our sickle cell population are more sensitive about these issues.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to add to that one?
Only if I could, a quick question for Dr. Odame, just on that point, that opportunity that comes from being attached to a specialized clinic that knows you and has known you over time. Does that mean that each time a person or presents themselves or takes their child in, that opportunity is offered? Is it always in the air sort of thing that, you know, this is an opportunity at this visit perhaps to re-engage around the conversation and receive it? Just wondering if that's ongoing conversation.
Right, that's a great question. So far as I'm concerned, if you have sickle cell, you are an elite patient, so far as I'm concerned. That means you have a direct connection to me, to the nurses, to the nurse practitioners. We receive phone calls, I receive emails on the weekends, I receive text messages, and I will respond if I know it's a sickle cell patient. So I think what we need to do is to connect, make sure that every sickle cell patient is connected. And it is that connection that there's somebody out there who knows me, not just as an ordinary person, but who knows me as a person, an individual with special needs, that will listen to me and answer my question. If we can create that, there are too many gaps, there are too many people who are disconnected, and that is where the challenge is. But if you're connected to a home, it's a family, and your questions will be answered all the time.
And so I agree with that too. Having been a previous Sick Kids nurse and being able to kind of float in and out of the clinic and be involved in sickle cell, I 100% agree. You are connected to a sickle cell comprehensive center, you will have your questions answered, you will have that support. And we know where the gap for me, or where we're really challenged still, is for those that don't have that connection, and really moving into the adult scene. Here at North York, really trying to make some headway on how do we ensure our patients who come to North York are able to still access a high level of service and not have to deal with the number of barriers, or at least at a reduced impact, the number of barriers you generally see when you hit emerge. We're really focused on that. So I got an email this morning. I know there's a sickle cell patient in emerge. And so one of the things we've triggered is a sickle cell advocacy group here at North York. That's only because though I'm here and because I want one, right? And because my position allows me to I'm in a position where I'm able to just create that group and just talk to the right people. It is so it's around that. Who are you connected to? It does really come to that. And I really wish, it didn't. So I do hope the Ontario Health Standards, which I also do have the privilege to sit on that, around the table with you, Dr. Adami, for that. I do hope those standards will help to truly pull in our community, those that are out in the community, those that are kind of not connected. How do we connect all of us to ensure that everyone has that equitable access? So thank you for that point. Anybody else? Okay, so guys, I have the poll working. So please bear with me. The poll is going to go up. It's the end, right? We're going to get.
You went on mute, Karen.
Yep, you're right. I love it. Thanks. Okay, so your post poll, I'm going to launch it now and you should see it on the screen. Please, thank you. So what is your vaccine confidence? We had started off with this at the beginning, right? What is your trust in? Okay, wait, let me get my thing. What is your trust in? Oh, it's on slide 1. But you guys, wait, what is your trust in the system, right? What is your trust in the information that's been given to you? And then something really, it's all about trust. What is your trust level? After you've been in this presentation, has your trust level changed a lot? Has your trust level changed at all? So please, if we can, this is an anonymous poll, so it would be really nice to see if we can get many of us responding to this. And then we can overall see. Remembering that 10 is your highest vaccine confidence, and that as you come down the scale down to 1, low vaccine confidence slash trust in information. So we have half of us have responded. It's still going up. It's great. We still have people putting information in. Thank you guys for being willing to participate. And then we can look at the results to end off our session today. So we have 17 out of 28 people participated. So out of those 17, we have 10 of them, 8 out of 18. So 44% of people have a high vaccine confidence. A score of 9, that was 28% of people. So 5 people had a score of 9. 2 people had a score of 8, so it's 11%. And then we had 6 people, all the numbers are mixed, 2 people scored 6. So 11% gave a 6. We have 6% gave a 5. And okay, our lowest number was a 5 out of 10. I kind of feel good about that, like halfway, right? And so what we were hoping was to be able to, at least to see the beginning one, to be able to compare, but I feel good. 5, but everyone's sitting between a 5 and 10. So it kind of feels like we either have high confidence or fairly pretty good, quite moderate. So hopefully today's session was able to shift your confidence in one way or the other, and that you feel more informed. That's really what our purpose was today. I thank all of you amazing panelists. Dr. Adami, I really appreciate making time to join us today. Dr. Newton, thank you too. Each of you for joining on a Saturday for sure. Cynthia, thank you for joining, and Delaney, it's great to have you really round out the panel today. So for everyone who joined online, thank you for staying with us. We really appreciate you. As you leave the session, you will get a survey pop up on the screen for you. If you could just let us know feedback, could we have done anything differently? Is there more information you want to hear from SCAGO? Any sort of feedback, it's anonymous again. Please feel free to share it with us. My panelists, is there any last, we do have a couple, are there any last words that you have for those that are listening? Maybe one takeaway point actually from each of you as we leave would be great. Thank you.
Let me start by saying that the latest information we are getting for sickle cell patients is that their antibody level wanes much more quickly, which means that if you have sickle cell, I will encourage you to pay attention to boosters. It's very possible, looking into the future, that we'll have a new generation of vaccines that produce immunity that lasts longer. And that's where the research is going, so that we don't have to take it ever so often. I think that's people's concern. If it can prolong the interval of needing boosters, I think many of us will be much happier. And I think that's where the research will go. So if you have sickle cell and you have opportunity to get a booster, please do. It's helpful because it can boost your antibody level. And the good news of giving is that actually you also have some advantage in protecting you against very severe disease, which is something that you can take as a positive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Odami. I will follow just pulling a point or two from my share, which was just about bringing some appreciation for the complexity of decision-making that we undertake when we think about the COVID vaccine for ourselves or for others we're looking after. And to I would say assist us with what is a large and important task, assist ourselves by connecting to information that is personalized, high in quality, and keeping ourselves open to receiving that information at all of the different points and for all of the different decisions we need to make. I'm just so happy to know that there is a wealth of information that is of good quality out there, and that there are ways to help people connect to it. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for sharing your knowledge today. What I would, my takeaway would be to keep our relationships, ask open-ended questions and have open-ended thinking, and really slowing things down when you're having some of those conversations about vaccine hesitance and engaging people. Thanks everyone.
Perfect. And just to piggyback, I just want to reiterate to folks online that there are a number of community-led, person-centered, equity-centered vaccine initiatives that are being developed and delivered to folks. There are a variety of practitioners who have the time and energy to spend with you to answer any of your questions in and around the vaccine, both pre and post, and are definitely willing to help alleviate any concerns you may have. Sickle recently administered or helped deliver one of these very same clinics for sickle cell disease patients with Black Creek Community Health Center, and there'll be more to come. So rest assured, we're doing all we can to advance equity for members of the sickle cell disease community, and really want to ensure that we give you all the relevant information to make an informed decision. And I'd be remiss not to thank our moderator, Karen, for masterfully walking us through the session today. I think I can speak on behalf of the panel that you've done a great job as a new Zoomer, and thank you for helping us stay on task.
Thank you. And in the chat, someone had posted if they could get copies of the slides. So all of our sessions, the recordings and the slides will all be there. They get posted to our Chicago website. I've put the link in the chat so you can actually see our previous site. So last month, just so you guys know, we focused on mental health, another fantastic session with a couple of doctors, one here in Ontario and another one of our colleagues in Africa at the time. So a really great discussion generated. Thank you all again for joining us today, and look out for our April session. We'll have another one coming up, and have a blessed day and enjoy your weekend. Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
You can stay or go. I just like to wait.